in the last segment, we were talking about the Republicans who really have shut down Steve King, who is the congressman from Iowa who has a long history of overt racism. And they shut him down for something that was, for saying something that was, highly problematic. Like, I don't see what the problem is with white supremacy. But frankly, it's in the pantheon of racist things that Stephen King has said. I don't know if that would make the top quartile, frankly. And it's not, is it really that much different than Donald Trump saying, look, there are good people on both sides of the Charlottesville marches, white supremacy marches. And, but nevertheless, they felt the pressure, and maybe it was because they're already weakened by the Democratic win in November. They're already weakened by their ownership of the government shutdown, which I think they suspect could end up as a real disaster for them. And we spoke about that earlier. I think they're right if that's their assessment. And we also saw this week another crack, and we should say they're going to remove Steve King, or they're going to keep him from being on the committees. And in terms of like his reelection chances, being on the agriculture committee is huge when you're from Iowa. That's a big to lose that opportunity is a big deal for that guy. But aside from that, we saw in the Senate a fascinating development where 11 Republican senators voted with the Democrats in an attempt to push back on the Trump administration's rollback of sanctions of a major Russian oligarch. Am I reading too much into that? What is that supposed to mean?
Well, I think it's interesting that this has been look. Just sort of, if we pull back a little bit and look at the big picture here, that the issue of sanctions, Russian sanctions, is the issue, perhaps with along with the potential withdrawal of the U.S. from NATO. Those are the two big Russia, U.S. foreign policy issues that are dogging Donald Trump because of his very strange and as yet unknown motivations for going so far afield from what has been the normal U.S. consensus on those issues. These sanctions are, central to the Trump Tower meeting. They're central to the Mueller investigation having to do with Ukraine and, Paul Manafort, and on and on and on. This is a central issue. And yet Trump, from the very beginning, his administration, and he has been in the process of lifting sanctions, of doing, of basically trying to, as Hillary Clinton put it during the debates, talk the Putin line on this. And it's very, very strange. So, this week, this one was about a Russian oligarch who's an owner of a big aluminum company in Russia. And you recall that there are sanctions, that had been put on this firm sometime back. There apparently has been an intense lobbying effort on the part of this guy. His name's Oleg Deripaska, to lift those sanctions on the aluminum. And there has been some, within the business world and in the, in that area. You remember Trump has imposed tariffs on aluminum and steel from China. So there's intense efforts to try and ensure that aluminum can be bought from other places, for instance, from people like Oleg Deripaska. And these sanctions were on him because of the alleged interference in the Russian election, his association with all of that. This has been going on, going back and forth. Well, Steve Mnuchin and the Treasury Department, just sort of out of the blue, just before Christmas, decided to lift the sanctions on Deripaska, allegedly because he had reduced his ownership share in this company, which would allow Americans to import this sanctioned Russian aluminum. It's all phony. Deripaska,
Right.
it's all a matter of paperwork. He still, of course, is the owner. he's an oligarch, right? I mean, say, okay, yeah, we will, fix up the paperwork. We'll be fine. So that's what he did. And they did it kind of in the dead of night. When they do these things, there's just this short period of time for the Congress to object before it just happens, right? And often that's how these things work. The Treasury Department does this, the Congress just lets it slide, and nobody has to vote on anything. It's partially, and it's not just that Republicans came over, it's the fact that they decided to take this up at all. And they were very alarmed when they found it. They came back from the holiday and went, whoa, what is this? And they decided, and even, good old Mitch, who's pretty good at avoiding any kind of responsibility, he let this vote come to the floor, which is also kind of unusual. And they ended up having the vote. I don't think it ended up being enough to completely lift to stop the sanctions. But it did show resistance to Trump on this issue. And this is not the first time. They did it before when they passed a bill 98-0 with votes to override Trump that he would not be allowed to unilaterally lift the earlier sanctions on Russia over the Ukraine incursion and also the interference in the election. So there is something in the Senate, what a rare kind of, slight consensus that this may be even more important than, salving Trump and giving him, licking his boots, which is highly unusual. But this does seem to be one of those situations.
My suspicion is that this is Mitch McConnell's way of saying to a lot of those senators who are up for re-election and who are not coming from states that are so blood red that Donald Trump is in positive territory there. Like, okay, I know I'm screwing you guys in terms of the government shutdown, but here you can have this vote, which will, show some type of independence, but it's not going to go anywhere. I mean, there are times where the leader basically says, I'm giving you a freebie and here's your payback for putting up with the fact that I'm not going to end the government shutdown. That's my interpretation of this. But it's a fascinating story, and we got to take a break. But when we come back in the next hour, I want to talk about Bill Barr. And I want to talk about Wheeler as well. We're going to have a new EPA chief. We're going to have a new attorney general, it appears. And we're going to try and preview that. It's a little bit scary. And then we will also obviously talk about the major Russian stories this week involving the president. I'm Sam Seder. This is Ring of Fire Radio. We'll be right back after this.